All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. The Mahabharata. I mean, it's an absolutely massive text, right? Just bursting with countless characters and these wildly complex family trees. But today, we're going to zero in on its most profound philosophical core, the Bhagavad Gita. And we're going to look at it entirely through the lens of the epic's absolute wild card, its most dynamic human catalyst, Draupadi. Because honestly, once you understand her incredible journey, the lofty, sometimes abstract spiritual concepts of this text suddenly become very, very real.
So right off the bat, you need to know Draupadi did not have a normal birth. According to the texts, she wasn't born of a woman. Nope. She arose fully grown, a youthful maiden literally right out of a blazing sacrificial fire conducted by King Drupada. This description perfectly captures how the ancient verses saw her, possessing these dark, lotus-light eyes and an otherworldly fragrance. She wasn't just your average princess. From her very first fiery breath, she was an incarnation destined to completely upend the world and bring down the corrupt Kuru dynasty. Which brings us to the ultimate question, doesn't it? How exactly does her intensely visceral, deeply unfair human struggle connect with the soaring cosmic philosophy we eventually get in the Bhagavad Gita? Well, to understand the philosophy, we've got to understand the woman who was standing right at the dead center of the conflict.
Section 1. Born of Sacred Fire, the Name Game. If you've read the epic, you know characters rarely just stick to one name, and Draupadi's various titles really anchor the wildly different phases of her life. She's Draupadi, daughter of Drupada, but she's also Krishna, which points to her famously beautiful dark complexion. She's Panchali, showing she's from the Panchala kingdom. Then there is Yajnasini, constantly reminding us, hey, she was born from that sacrificial fire. And later, she's Sairendri, the fake name she's forced to use when she's living hidden away as a maid. It's like every single name is a totally different chapter in a life defined by just extreme transitions.
Moving on to Section 2, the Polyandrous Queen.
Okay, we really have to pause here for a second because this setup is incredibly rare in the context of Hindu history. Polygyny, a king having multiple wives, that was super common. But polyandry, a woman having multiple husbands, that was basically a huge social taboo. Yet, Draupadi famously marries all 5 Pandava brothers. So how on earth did the ancient text justify her tying the knot with Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, and Sahadeva?
Well, the epic actually uses 3 distinct mythological workarounds to reconcile this shocking societal deviation with divine logic. First, the text claims she's an incarnation of the goddess Shri, the goddess of prosperity, who's destined to marry the Pandavas because they're partial incarnations of the god Indra. Makes sense, right? Second, there's this wild tale of a sage's daughter who prayed to Lord Shiva for a virtuous husband, but she absent-mindedly asked 5 times. Basically a divine typo. So Shiva says, okay, 5 husbands in your next life. And finally, the southern versions of the text introduce Nalayani. She was a devoted wife cursed by her ascetic husband to have 5 husbands in her rebirth just to satisfy her desires. So you see, layer upon layer of myth is used to ensure her unique marriage is viewed as absolute destiny, definitely not deviance.
All right, Section 3, the Game of Dice.
This is where things go completely off the rails. Her eldest husband, King Yudhishthira, gets dragged into a totally rigged game of dice against their bitter rivals, the Kauravas. Intoxicated by the game, and losing badly, he first gambles away his wealth. Then, shockingly, he stakes his own brothers, then himself, and finally, goaded by his rivals, he wagers Draupadi, and he loses. So she gets physically dragged into the assembly hall by her hair. But here's the thing, she doesn't just submit to her captors. Not at all. Instead, she weaponizes her brilliant intellect and her deep education in political science and dharma. She literally stares down the elders of the court and questions the fundamental legality of what just happened. She asks, how can a man who has already gambled away his own freedom, a man who is now legally a slave, how can he possibly possess the legal right to wager a free queen? She uses pure logic and the law to hold a mirror right up to the assembly's blatant hypocrisy. And then, when the Kaurava prince Dushasana tries to publicly disrobe her, the ultimate humiliation, a literal miracle happens. As he unwraps her sari, the fabric just endlessly extends. He pulls and pulls, literally until he collapses from sheer exhaustion, but Draupadi remains fully clothed. This brutal, incredibly visceral moment of survival locks in her fierce vow for future vengeance. From this second on, the Great War isn't just a possibility,
It is absolutely inevitable.
Which brings us to Section 4, Exile and Retribution.
Even after being totally stripped of her kingdom and all that vast wealth, Draupadi's resilience just shines through every single hardship they throw at her. Whether she's roughing it in the harsh forest for 13 years, or miraculously multiplying a single grain of rice with Krishna's help to feed a demanding sage so she can avoid his legendary curse, of course, or living hidden as a lowly maid, she never ever breaks. At one point, an arrogant general named Kachaka starts harassing her during her year in hiding. Does she wait for a savior? Nope. She orchestrates this stealthy, lethal plan with her husband Bhima to have Kachaka taken out. She demands respect and she exacts retribution every time.
Now, Section 5, the Song of God. So right as the devastating Kurukshetra war is finally about to kick off, the narrative suddenly shifts away from epic bloodshed and personal trauma to these incredibly serene spiritual teachings. Arjuna, one of Draupadi's husbands, basically has a panic attack and collapses in anguish at the thought of the impending slaughter. To cure this worldly distress, Lord Krishna steps in and delivers the Bhagavad Gita. Its main goal? To impart Brahmavidya, the science of God realization, offering a massive cosmic perspective on duty, life, and death.
But listen, the Gita isn't just some lofty, abstract philosophy that only monks can understand. It's actually a highly practical survival guide. It teaches yoga, clear-cut, actionable techniques for implementing these spiritual rules right into everyday messy life. And why does this matter so much for Draupadi? Well, because the Gita is exactly the kind of essential discourse required to navigate the exact earthly suffering she embodies. It teaches you how to act with absolute dedication to your duty, your dharma, without letting yourself get paralyzed by the chaotic, deeply unfair results of the material world.
And finally, Section 6, Legacy of a Goddess. Ultimately, Draupadi transcended the tragic boundaries of her earthly life. Look, as an epic queen, her life was honestly defined by immense sorrow. Yes, she won the war, but she lost all 5 of her sons in a horrific night raid. And in the end, she was the very first of the Pandavas to fall dead on their final journey to heaven. But today, particularly in South India and among Tamil diaspora communities all over the world, she's worshipped as a regional goddess. The Draupadi Amman cult boasts over 400 temples. They honor her fiery birth and that unbreakable resilience through these intense, mind-blowing firewalking rituals. She went from being a suffering queen to this profound, towering symbol of female empowerment and divine strength.
And really, this brings us completely full circle back to the wisdom of the Gita. This beautiful quote from chapter 7, verse 7, is a gentle reminder that all the chaotic events of the epic, the rigged dice games, the miserable exiles, the brutal war, and Draupadi's literally unimaginable grief, are all ultimately strung together by a higher divine purpose. Even in the absolute darkest, most bleak moments of the Mahabharata, that spiritual thread is there, holding the whole shebang together.
So, I want to leave you with this to chew on. Draupadi lived a life of intense action, heavy duty, and incredible endurance, which are the exact principles Krishna teaches in the Gita. When we face our own unfair trials, how can we channel that fiery resilience of hers while still holding on to the spiritual peace of the Gita? Think about how you can string the chaotic, messy beads of your own life onto a much higher thread. Keep exploring that idea, and thanks for joining me for this explainer today.